Okay, I'm very excited to have on the Goldstein on Gelt show Jason Parker, who is a retirement income certified professional. He's also the best-selling author of Sound Retirement Planning, and in fact, he also hosts a radio show called Sound Retirement Radio. Jason, it sounds to me like you talk a lot about retirement, and I spend a lot of time talking to people in my day job about retirement. And one of the things that I think people often kind of mess up is they focus so much during their retirement on building wealth and getting richer and richer, because maybe that's what they've been trying to do for decades. And they don't realize that now's the time just to worry about month to month to make sure their cash flow is okay. Is that something you see also?
Absolutely. Doug, well, first of all, thank you for having me as a guest on the show, but absolutely, retirement's a different animal than your accumulation years. Retirement is all about cash flow. It's your income that will determine your lifestyle in retirement, not your net worth. And so understanding that transition of how you transition from accumulation phase into distribution phase is very important.
Yeah, so cash flow, I think, is a term that people don't really recognize refers to normal human beings. They think, oh, that's what companies do in their bookkeeping. So when you talk to someone about cash flow, how do you explain that?
It's just your income. I oftentimes say, if you don't have income, you don't have retirement, right? I mean, during our working years, we go to our jobs, we have our careers, and we earn income. In retirement, you just got to have income. If you don't have income, you don't have retirement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's very critical. And the cash flow, as the money coming in, has to hopefully be just a little bit more, if not a lot more, than the amount of money going out. One of the sources that people often have, and they just forget, is that when they begin to do these calculations, they'll say, well, I've got $1 million, but if I put it in the bank, I only make 1%, so that's $10,000 a year. I can't retire. When someone says that to you, what do you try to point out to him?
Well, you're right. There is an exercise that people need to go through. So oftentimes, I think people make the mistake of just taking a very relaxed approach to entering into retirement. They'll use something like the 4% rule, and they'll say, well, I've got $1 million, so I can spend $40,000 a year. And some of the academic research out there that's being done these days says that may be overly optimistic. A 2 to 3% withdrawal strategy may be more in line with expectations given where the stock market is and where bonds are today. Mm-hmm. So I think in order to really...
people, actually. That's a frightening thought. If you thought you were going to get $40,000 on your $1 million, now you're saying maybe only 20 or 30. That's a big lifestyle difference.
There was a time when $1 million seemed like a lot of money. But in order to really have, ultimately, the tagline for my show is clarity, confidence, and freedom. So we want people to have a greater sense of clarity about what's most important to them. We want them to have a greater sense of confidence to know the numbers are going to work. And so ultimately, they can go out and live with a greater sense of freedom. And really what I found, I think as financial advisors, we spend so much time and energy and effort talking about the nuances of the work that we do that we forget that most people don't really care, Doug. What most people really, they really don't. What they want,
right?
They want a good life. They just want to be able to enjoy retirement, have the same lifestyle that they've had. They want to be able to travel and visit their grandkids, and they don't want to ever run out of money in retirement. They don't ever want to become a burden to anybody physically or financially. It doesn't have to be complicated, but it does require putting in the work to have the plan ahead of time so that you have some of those contingencies built in and you just understand what it's going to look like as you're making that transition.
A lot of people seem so afraid of using principal in retirement because either they remember a time when interest rates were higher or their grandmother once told them, don't forget, you should live on the interest. And sometimes it's simply not practical, and sometimes it's just doesn't make sense because you may have a lot of principal, and it's okay to eat into the principal on a scheduled basis. Do you find, first off, do you agree with that it's okay to use principal during retirement?
Absolutely. Well, here's what I agree to most. The most important question people need to ask about their money, and I'll give this to you, and if they can answer this question, they're going to have a much better retirement. But the question is, what's the purpose of your money? Mm-hmm. Why do you have it in the first place? See, I think one of the fears of using principal is that people are concerned that there's not going to be anything left to leave to the people they care about. But for other people, they'll say, Jason, we've provided for our kids. We helped send them through college. We helped them get married and buy their first house. Really, the purpose of this money is just to make sure that we can maintain our lifestyle and never become a burden to the people we care about. So if you can answer the question of what's the purpose of the money, it's really going to help people understand what's okay and what's not. The flip side to that, though, is I remember it wasn't too many years ago, I had a couple come into my office. They had retired with about $500,000, and they felt like they were going to be just fine in retirement. And then, of course, they ended up spending too much money too quickly. And they also got hit with the financial crisis of 2008, 2009. By the time they made it into my office, they had spent all of that $500,000.
Oh, no.
They were only in their mid-70s, and they were in the process of selling their primary residence, which they had lived in for a long time, and downsizing into a mobile home. So yes, spending principal is okay, but if you make expectations about how quickly you can spend that money, again, retirement's all about cash flow. It's your income, not your net worth, that's going to determine your lifestyle. You just really got to have a good cash flow plan, a good spending plan.
We're talking with Jason Parker, who is the host of the Sound Retirement Radio Show. In fact, he's giving us some sound retirement. Jason's been talking to us about, first of all, understanding that the most critical number in retirement in terms of finances is how much money you have coming in every month. It's not how rich you are. And the fact is, there are a lot of people who may be very, very wealthy, but the money might not be producing income. You know, they own raw land, or they own a property that's not rented out. And you can be as rich as can be, but if you don't actually have money coming in every month, you're kind of stuck. And the other thing that Jason was pointing out is that it's okay to use capital, but to use it intelligently, so you don't burn yourself out in your 70s, but if you use a little bit at a time. The question, I guess, Jason, we really have to talk about is, how do you know how much you're using? How can you, in an intelligent manner, keep track of it, and not only just keep track of it, but then make smart decisions?
Absolutely. That's a great question. And I want to get back to a point you just made about, again, you saying it's about cash flow, not your net worth. I met a gentleman recently, came into my office, and like you were saying, he was worth, on paper, he looked great. He's worth several $1 million. But the reality is that most of that money, most of that net worth was tied up in land that wasn't producing any income for him. So again, here's a guy that's in his 70s. He's still working just to be able to pay the property taxes on this property. And, we went through a real estate market that was in a downturn. So we're just now, it seems like the market's pretty hot again. But it's certainly possible with land or with property to be in a situation where you're upside down or it's not producing income for you. So that's one of the reasons I say it doesn't really matter how much you're worth. It all is dependent on your income. But, Benjamin,
before you answer, I want to comment on what you said, then I'm going to ask you the question again because it's important. But one of the things you said about property, a lot of people here, and I know that there's a big push all over the place, people are advertising, just buy a property and rent it out and you'll collect the income and that'll be your pension. And Jason, what you said is exactly true, that it doesn't always work out that way. The property might not work out for you. The tenant might decide not to pay. It's not so easy. There's nothing easy in the world of finance. And being a professional landlord is complicated. So not that I'm against owning property, and there are lots of different ways of doing it. And if you are good at it, you have experience in it, and that's what you want to do during your retirement, fine. But if not, you've got to think more closely about your budgeting and exactly how much money you need every month. And that leads back to the question which I asked you, which is, how can people really do that in an intelligent and organized fashion?
I'm glad you asked the question. One of the projects we've been working on for the past year is to create a tool, internet software tool that will help people create a better budget. Benjamin Franklin once said, "Beware of the little expenses. A small leak will sink a great ship." And so oftentimes when people are putting together a budget, they forget about some of those little things. They forget about the renewal tabs for their car. They forget about the property taxes that are due once per year or the insurance premiums that are due once per year. And so their budget gets kind of sloppy, and it's those little expenses that really can derail your retirement plan. And so that's why we created some software to help make people's lives better.
Mm-hmm. I want to just comment because I saw an article recently that someone, I think some millionaire said, and I think the article was in Australia, he said, people have to, if they would stop spending the $19 on their avocado toast and, they could buy a house one day. And then the other side of the equation said, oh, really? If we only would spend a little bit less on our lunch or on our lattes, we'd be able to be successful. And they were kind of laughing at this. But I really think you're right, because it's the little things that build up over time. And it's not one time buying a coffee or one time spending too much on a meal or not paying attention to a specific bill. It's just that you end up, over time, these things really do build up, and it can really severely damage your retirement or your budget. Jason, tell me something. I want to learn a little bit more about this budget calculator. First of all, does it work? Does it matter what currency you live in? Because we have a lot of people living in Israel.
No, well, the calculator was designed for obviously people that live in the United States. And so it's not currency dependent. I mean, we're just talking about values, numbers. Mm-hmm. But it was designed as a tool. I mean, as I was designing, I was thinking about the people that we serve, who are primarily in the United States, or all of the folks that we serve are in the United States. But the name of the calculator, if people want to take a look at it, may not be appropriate for everybody, but it's called the Retirement Budget Calculator, just retirementbudgetcalculator.com.
Okay, so we will put a link to that at the show notes of goldsteinongelt.com. Is there anything, I understand there's actually a special offer you have for the listeners of today's show. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it's only good for 30 days, but for your listeners, we wanted to give them a special offer. This is a paid calculator, so we're not doing any advertising. This isn't not some kind of investment management tool. It's just a calculator that people have access to. We charge a one-time fee of $54. But for your listeners, if they use the coupon code GELT when they register, we'll give it to them for 50% off for 30 days.
Okay, we really appreciate that. Jason Parker, people can check you out at retirementbudgetcalculator.com or where else?
Soundretirementplanning.com.
Okay, thanks so much for taking the time. Look forward to having you back again soon.
Thanks a lot, Doug.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt Show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Check out all of Doug's money ideas at goldsteinongelt.com. Doug specializes in helping people who live outside the United States handle their U.S. investment accounts. If you have a question that you would like answered on the air or off, contact Doug at his website or send him an email to doug@profile-financial.com.